Welcome to our discussion today. The public discourse around recent events often paints a specific picture, but sometimes the raw data from the ground tells a dramatically different story. Today, we are diving deep into an analysis from an unnamed author published recently, which suggests that what is unfolding in Iran is not a war the United States is winning, but rather a multifaceted trap. Eloise, the author makes a very strong claim that the mainstream networks are missing the real story. What's the core of this claim?
The core argument is that the conflict we are seeing was entirely avoidable and in fact was preempted by the U.S., despite significant diplomatic breakthroughs. Just one day before Operation Epic Theory launched, on the morning of February 27, 2026, Oman's foreign minister, Badr Al-Busaidi, appeared on CBS News as Face the Nation. He laid out in specific detail what Iran had just agreed to in negotiations in Geneva. These weren't vague promises, but historic concessions.
Historic concessions, you say. Can you elaborate on what those specific points were? Because that sounds like it directly contradicts the stated justifications for military action.
Absolutely. Al-Busaidi stated that Iran agreed to zero stockpiling of enriched uranium, meaning no accumulated material that could be converted into a weapon. They also agreed to full, unrestricted access for International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors at every nuclear site. And finally, Iran committed to irreversibly downgrading its existing stockpiles to the lowest possible level, converting them to fuel that could never be weaponized again. The minister's words were direct, quote, "A peace deal is within our reach," end quote. He added that technical talks were already scheduled for Vienna the following Monday, and a fourth round of negotiations with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner was being arranged for the week after that.
So, the channel was open, a framework was on the table, and a deal was days away. And yet, the bombs fell anyway. How does the author explain this massive disconnect?
The author, citing Trita Parsi of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, points out that for Oman, a nation known for its diplomatic caution, going public on American national television was extraordinary. It was a message that diplomacy was working and needed space. However, within hours of that broadcast, the bombs fell. Joshua Scheer, writing for Scheer Post, precisely documented this timeline, arguing that the central justification for war, that Iran refused to give up its nuclear program, was being diplomatically neutralized in real time. The author concludes that what was preempted was not a nuclear breakout, but a breakthrough.
That's a stark reinterpretation of events, but did Iran, the other party in these negotiations, have any indication this was coming? Were they as surprised as the public might have been?
The source material indicates Iran was not surprised. According to Wikipedia's documented timeline of the 2025-2026 Iran-United States negotiations, while American diplomats were at the negotiating table in Geneva, the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier group was already sailing toward the Iranian coast. The military buildup occurred simultaneously with the peace talks. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and President Pezeshkian both made public statements warning that even if leaders were eliminated, the government would not fall. Araghchi said they could eliminate him, and 100 more like him would rise up. They made these statements because they already knew what was coming. The United States accepted Iran's most significant nuclear concessions in history, then killed their supreme leader and launched the largest air campaign in the Middle East in a generation.
This paints a picture of a calculated move, not a desperate reaction. This context then explains Iran's current actions, the intensity, and the targets. The author introduces a fascinating figure who predicted much of this, a Chinese-Canadian historian named Jiang Shui-kin. Tell us more about his analysis.
Jiang Shui-kin, a Yale-educated historian and geopolitical theorist, runs a YouTube channel called Predictive History. In May 2024, long before the bombs fell, he released a lecture titled, quote, "Why America Will Invade Iran and Lose," end quote. He made 3 specific predictions. Trump would win the 2024 election, the United States would go to war with Iran, and the United States would lose that war, permanently changing the global order. His channel has since exploded as reality catches up to his forecasts.
So, he essentially saw this as a trap. What's the essence of Jiang's game theory breakdown regarding Iran's strategy?
Jiang argues that Iran is not fighting to survive this war, but to use it. The conflict is a calculated opportunity for them to unify their fractured population under a nationalist banner, permanently expel American influence from the region, and bleed the United States financially and militarily until Washington has no choice but to leave. Iran does not need to win on the battlefield. They need the United States to stay long enough that the cost of staying becomes politically and financially impossible. That's why they're willing to absorb the air campaign and activated every proxy simultaneously.
That's a very different objective than what we typically hear. He also made chilling predictions about a potential ground war, calling American troops hostages. What did he mean by that?
Xi Jinping described Iran's mountainous terrain as extremely difficult for conventional warfare. He told his students, quote, "To win a war, you need to avoid encirclement, mass your forces, and protect your supply lines. Iran's geography makes all of this nearly impossible," end quote. He estimated that controlling Iran would require at least 3 to 4 million soldiers, a number he deemed militarily and politically impossible for the U.S. His point is that a ground war would quickly become a quagmire, turning soldiers into de facto hostages due to the terrain and the sheer scale of the commitment required.
Beyond the battlefield, Yang also predicted domestic chaos within the United States. How does a war in Iran lead to such severe internal division?
He predicted that the moment Americans start dying at scale in the Middle East, and especially if a draft is instituted, it will create chaos. This would exacerbate domestic divisions between those defending the old American empire and those rallying behind Trump's America First agenda, pushing the country towards civil conflict. His analysis suggests a failed war would not end Trump's political career, but rather give him the emergency justification he needs to consolidate power and pursue a third term. Yang reaffirmed these predictions in June 2025, stating that Trump, Israel, and Iran all wanted the U.S. to invade, each for different reasons, but all pulling in the same direction. That, he concluded, is the trap.
So the war itself is part of a larger multi-layered trap. Let's talk about the financial aspect, which the author calls the math of bankruptcy. How is Iran draining the U.S. Treasury?
Iran is launching waves of inexpensive Lucas drones, which cost approximately $35,000 to build, about the price of a used Honda Civic. To shoot down these cheap drones, the U.S. is using defensive missiles that cost millions of dollars each. A THAAD interceptor costs between $12.7 million and $15.5 million. An SM-3 missile can be up to $27.9 million. Even a Patriot PAC-3 MSE is $4 million to $12 million. Iran is throwing pennies, and the United States is burning stacks of $100 bills to block them.
That's an incredible asymmetry in costs. What's the financial toll it's already taken?
In just the first 40 hours, U.S. Central Command's own estimates show the military burned through between $6 billion and $10 billion. Offensive operations accelerate this. Over 200 Tomahawk cruise missiles launched at $2 million each. B-2 stealth bombers cost up to $203,000 for every single hour in the air. The U.S. Navy pays $13 million daily just to keep 2 carrier groups in the region. Total daily theater operations are hitting $40 million every 24 hours. The system is bleeding out by design.
And this financial drain is just one part of the strategy. The author states that draining the treasury is only the bait, and the real objective is to force American soldiers into a ground war, using water as a weapon. How does that work?
Iran's doctrine has shifted to what military specialists call asymmetric endurance. Their strategy is not to defeat the U.S. militarily, but to force a ground commitment the U.S. cannot sustain. They are systematically targeting infrastructure to cause societal collapse in the Gulf states, forcing the U.S. to intervene on the ground. Christian Coates Ulrichsen, a Gulf expert, documents Iran's deliberate targeting of airports, hotels, and oil and gas facilities across multiple countries. Qatar even shot down 2 Iranian jets after strikes on its LNG facilities.
But the escalation to desalination plants seems particularly extreme and devastating. What are the implications if those plants are hit?
Ulrichsen explicitly states that targeting desalination plants is the next step in the escalation ladder, causing immense concern among Gulf nations. The Gulf states rely on these plants for nearly all their fresh water. If they go down, there's no backup. Cities don't slowly degrade. They collapse within 72 hours without water. This would lead to mass panic, mass displacement, and the complete disintegration of allied governments. The U.S. would have no choice but to send infantry to secure any remaining plants, manage the displacement, and prevent total regional collapse. This is the meat grinder Iran is building, targeting airports first, then energy, then water, to force a ground war.
That's a terrifying scenario. Then there's the final jaw of the trap, as the author puts it. The Strait of Hormuz. What's happening there?
Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps formally declared enforcement of a Strait of Hormuz closure, threatening any vessel attempting transit. Windward Maritime Intelligence, an AI platform tracking vessel movement, documented these warnings. Within 36 hours of the strike's beginning, 4 commercial tankers were hit. This isn't precision targeting, it's area denial, designed to stop all commercial traffic regardless of nationality.
And what's been the immediate impact on global trade and the economy?
As of March 2nd, tanker traffic through the strait is down 70%. Over 150 freight ships, including oil tankers, are stalled and anchored. War risk insurance has been withdrawn entirely. The Strait of Hormuz carries roughly 20% of all globally traded oil and liquefied natural gas, about 20 million barrels per day. Ali Vyas of the International Crisis Group warns that a strait closure would, quote, reverberate far beyond energy markets, tightening financial conditions, fueling inflation, and pushing fragile economies closer to recession in a matter of weeks, end quote.
The author takes this further, linking it to the petrodollar. What's the ultimate financial threat here?
The author argues this is a direct assault on the foundation of American economic power, which rests on the petrodollar, the global agreement to use U.S. currency for oil. If nations become desperate enough for energy, they will turn to non-Western sources and bypass the dollar. The Cost of War Project at Brown University has documented that if the world stops depending on the dollar to buy energy, American financial dominance doesn't just weaken, it collapses. This would prevent the U.S. Treasury from funding its own debt, including the billions burned in this conflict.
Beyond the immediate human and economic costs, the author also points to irreversible environmental damage. What are the long-term consequences of these high-tech munitions?
Both sides are hitting the region with advanced munitions that leave behind deep soil chemical runoff. Environmental toxicologists warn that this level of chemical saturation is effectively irreversible. Once warhead toxins penetrate the deep earth, the soil does not recover on any human timescale. The region's capacity to grow food and support life is being damaged for generations, long after the last missile falls.
So at hour 72, the picture painted is one of a regime that chose to burn down the entire region rather than fall alone. It's hitting critical infrastructure across 6 countries, bleeding the U.S. Treasury with cheap drones against expensive defenses, activating every proxy force, locking down the Strait of Hormuz, and poisoning the very land. And all this while a nuclear-armed Israel fights for survival on multiple borders. The author concludes by reminding us that this did not have to happen, that peace was in fact within reach just days before. If you found this analysis insightful, consider sharing this episode with someone who might benefit from hearing it.